Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Castillo. I'm the Teen Services Coordinator at Alexandria Library. I'm at the Beatley Central Library over on Duke Street in Alexandria. I know we have an audience with people from across the area, so welcome. I'm going to turn the floor over to Nacy Veach with the Princeton Review, and she'll present SAT, ACT, or both.
Perfect. Thank you so much, folks. It is a pleasure to be here in front of you this evening virtually, although I'm sure we all wish that we could be here together in person. As Andrea mentioned, I am going to be talking to you all about taking the SAT, ACT, or both, and I will get into the agenda of that here in just a moment. But just to give you a little background, my name is Nacy. We already know that. I work for the Princeton Review. My primary job is to be a liaison between the libraries and schools in the DMV area. And so I am here with a wealth of knowledge and tons of free resources and guidance for you as you take your test prep journey. I have worked in education now for almost 18 years. It's hard to believe that I'm that old, but I have worked both in the classroom. I've worked for other supplemental test prep companies, and I have been here at the Princeton Review for 6 years. So I hope that today I will have the opportunity to answer some of those burning questions that you have about the SAT or ACT, standardized tests, or even college admissions in general. So please, again, use me as a resource, and we will have some time at the end for questions, but feel free to pop your questions in the chat as they pertain to the information that I'm covering this evening. Okay, so today we're going to discuss how you should prepare for the SAT, the ACT, or both tests to improve your chances of getting into college. Now, in this presentation, we're going to go over 3 main ideas to let you know how the SAT, ACT, or both tests can help you get into your dream college. Now, I'm only speaking to you for about an hour, so we're not going to have all the time to get into every little detail about these tests, but there are really 3 things that I want to address. Now, the first of that is going to be the truths and misconceptions about standardized tests. So we're going to go over some misconceptions that you might have heard about the SAT and the ACT, and then I'm going to give you all the facts about both tests. Then in our second section, we're going to go over all the things that the SAT and ACT have in common, as well as the major differences between the 2 tests. And then lastly, improving your scores. We want to discuss here the tips, tricks, and strategies that you can use to make sure that you can improve your scores on these standardized tests. Now, when we're done today, you will know how to begin your test prep so that you can get the score you need to get into your dream college, because that is the goal. Okay, so first off, we're going to dive straight into the truths and misconceptions about standardized testing. Now, we're sure that you have probably heard plenty of them. We are uniquely positioned here at the Princeton Review to hear from both parents and students. So you may or may not have heard things like school X only cares about the SAT, or school Y only really cares about the ACT. Or maybe you have heard that certain schools have cutoff scores that students must have. You may even have heard that if you're better at math or science, or if you're better at history or literature, then there's a specific test that you can take. So tonight, I'm going to do my very best to just debunk some of the myths and break down everything from the beginning. Now, the SAT and ACT are college admissions exams, and they're built to be used by college admissions offices as evaluative tools. Yet the pressing question here is, how do these administrative offices or committees use the SAT and ACT? And are they really an important factor when it comes to the application process for college admissions? Now, we know what the top factors in the admission processes are for first-time freshmen applying to college. And we know this because NACAC, which is the National Association for College Admissions Counseling, they release a survey every year that's called the State of College Admissions. And basically what that does is just gives us an overview of college admissions in America. Now, in the 2019 survey they released, they asked the schools to rank the top factors for admitting first-time freshmen. So I am going to see if we can get a little participation from the audience here, and see if you can tell me what you think the #1 factor is for being admitted as a first-time freshman. In other words, what are colleges and universities and their admissions committees looking for first and foremost when deciding if you're a good fit for their school? All right, so GPA, thank you, Ruth. Growth, okay, that's a kind of a broad one, but a good one. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have an idea of what they think is the most important thing? I'll give you all just another second or two here, and I will go ahead and reveal that for you. Anybody else? Okay, someone says school activity. The #1 factor for first-time freshmen is grades. So despite popular belief, it is actually not your SAT or ACT scores at all. Now, colleges want to see that you have done well in high school, which they see by the grades that's in your high school transcript. All right, so that brings me to #2. What do you think the #2 factor for admitting first-time freshmen would be? I'll give you all just a second to take a guess. Okay, SAT, ACT scores, that's a great guess. Anybody else have a guess? Extracurricular activities, okay? So the truth here is that the second factor that they're looking for are high school curriculums. So this is, of course, the other thing that college admissions offices see when they're looking at your college transcript. Now that tells you how important the transcript really is in your college application. Now, I'm not going to make anyone guess #3 because at this point you probably already know what it is, and the #3 factor is test scores. So the third most important factor for admitting first-time freshmen are your SAT or ACT scores. Now, we've heard college admissions officers say, we care more about what you did over the course of 4 years than what we care, than what you did in 4 hours on a Saturday. Now, this is true, and grades are the #1 factor, but just know that how you did on those 4 hours on a Saturday also matter as well. Now, knowing this gives you the advantage in the college application process. So you get a chance to prepare for these 4 hours and do a tremendous amount to improve your score and your chances of getting into college. Now, these tests are also important for college admissions offices because they provide a fantastic opportunity for you to make a key element of your application stand out. We recommend generally that students prepare for the SAT, ACT, the spring semester of their junior year, and then to be absolutely done with test prep before senior year even starts. So this will allow you to know where you stand on the third most important factor for admissions offices before you even apply. Now, I can see a question that's probably pressing in your mind at this point, and that is, well, what about college's new test optional admissions? So during the COVID pandemic, many schools went at least temporarily test optional due to the difficulty that students had in even registering for the SAT or ACT. Now, a few of those schools even adopted permanent test optional policies. So we're going to review some key points about test optional admissions. So firstly, a simple definition, test optional admissions processes do not require the SAT or ACT scores for admissions consideration. That's it. Test optional doesn't mean that the test is prohibited or that they're test free, okay, or that you can't submit your test scores to the said college or university. What test optional policies do not mean is that it doesn't mean that they're not looking for those test scores either. So it simply means that they're just going to evaluate your application whether or not you decide to submit your application or your SAT, ACT scores. So secondly, another misconception is that test optional schools are easier to get into. In fact, it's quite the opposite. So test optional schools receive more applications and actually have lower admissions rates. There were record numbers of applications that were received in the past year, or the first year of the COVID pandemic. And historically, schools that adopted test optional policies not only receive more applications and have lower admissions rates, but they also had higher average test scores. And then lastly, you must remember this: if any school or scholarship that you're applying to requires an SAT or ACT score, then the process is not test optional. It doesn't matter if most of the schools that you're applying to only adopt test optional policies. If you want to apply to even one school that requires those scores, then you're just going to have to take those tests. And more crucially, you should plan on being through with standardized testing excuse me, before you decide on your final application list. So you need to take the SAT or ACT if you really want to keep all your options open for colleges and universities. And then I'll supply a link for you guys in my follow-up just to give you more information about that. So what are you facing when you take the SAT or ACT? Okay, so let's start with what standardized tests really measure. And we're going to do true or false, and we would do kind of an in-person show of hands game if we were together in person. And I would love to tell you that there aren't any wrong answers, but I can't. But what I can tell you is that we have put these here because we see wrong answers all the time. Now, we're sure you've heard them at some point, and we want to make sure that you know what the right answer is here. So if you give a wrong answer in your head, then there's probably a good reason for that. So the first one is, do college admissions tests like the SAT and ACT measure your intelligence? And you don't have to participate in the chat, but I want you to think about what you feel the correct answer is there. And the answer is false. Standardized tests do not measure your intelligence in any way. How well you do really has nothing to do with how smart you are or how creative you are. And so the question is what do they really test? And how well do you take the SAT or ACT? Now, our second question is do these tests reflect your high school GPA? And the answer here is also false. No, absolutely not at all. I want you to think about it this way. So half of the SAT is math, while math is only one class among all the classes you take in school. A student who's not strong at math will do much worse on the SAT than they may do in high school, but also your high school GPA is based on many different things, different coursework, essays, projects, as well as tests, and these are just tests. Next, do standardized tests measure or predict your college GPA? This one gets a little tricky, but once again, it is false. They actually do a worse job of predicting a student's college GPA than reflecting a student's high school GPA. And by that, I mean, once you're in college, once you're really able to focus on things that you enjoy and that you're going to be good at in your major, that means that you're likely to do better in college than in high school. Also, you're going to be taking fewer tests in college than you did in high school, making test-taking skills a bit less important in college. And then lastly, do these test what you have learned in high school? And this is the most important question, but also the hardest to answer. Though any answer would be correct because there are obviously going to be things on the SAT and ACT that you learned in high school. So, I mean, you're probably going to see the Pythagorean theorem show up somewhere on these tests. Grammar rules are going to show up whether you take the SAT or ACT. And it may even test something that you've learned all the way back in middle school. But the content isn't what actually makes standardized tests so difficult. Instead, it's that the standardized tests are completely different from the tests that you're used to taking in high school. Now, to elaborate on that a little more, the tests that you are used to taking in school are totally different from the SAT, the ACT, different from the PSAT, different from AP exams, and different from IB exams. Now, your high school tests are going to follow a certain pattern. They cover a limited subject matter, at most maybe only 1 year of one course in the case of a final, but usually your high school tests cover just a few chapters or even just one chapter from a textbook. Even more importantly, a high school test evaluates your content knowledge and how much you know about a given subject. That's why you're usually given plenty of time to finish an exam and why your teachers want to give you partial credit or even extra credit in their classes. Now, they can also do that because high school tests are graded by human beings. And then finally, your high school tests are just one element of your overall grade in a course. Now, in contrast, standardized tests, excuse me, like the SAT and ACT cover years of material, and they jump around not only between grammar, reading, and math, but they also go between different topics within those subjects. And to succeed, it doesn't matter what you know, but if you can memorize the details and deploy the strategies that you need for these types of tests. Now, you must also do all of that in a very rigorously timed setting, and you need to make sure that you get the right answer and avoid the wrong answers because it is going to be graded by a machine. And now, if all of that isn't stressful enough, your one final score is the only thing that matters. And so just to recap, this is why the SAT and the ACT and other standardized tests as well are so difficult for many students. Now, you've learned one way to take a test your entire life, and now you have to scratch that and you're being judged on something that is completely different. Now, I'm gonna see if there are any questions. Please feel free to pop those into the chat. I will be checking those in the next few minutes, and we're just gonna keep moving forward. Okay, bullet point, important, remember, standardized tests can make a difference. Always remember that many merit scholarships, are directly tied to SAT and ACT scores. Not just that schools consider standardized test scores as part of their evaluation for merit aid, but that there are actually specific scholarships that require certain SAT or ACT scores. And that includes state-funded scholarships, the National Merit Scholarship, for example, Army, Navy, Air Force, ROTC scholarships as well. So these scholarships are even accepted at some schools. So although a school might de-emphasize a test score in their admission process, you're still going to need a good score on the SAT or ACT to be considered for certain types of merit scholarships. So now the burning question that we're all here for, and that is, which test should I take, the SAT or ACT? Now, because here at the Princeton Review, we hear this a lot. We want you to know that we want you to know more about our students, and when they take these test prep courses, they should take that and flip it around and ask a different question. And that is really, why not take both tests? Now, I know you're thinking, because I don't want to take two different tests, or you're a test prep company, you're going to tell me that you want us to prepare for both tests. But really, the two tests are so similar that we don't even recommend students take both, prep individually for SAT and ACT, because what you're doing in one of the courses is largely going to translate to what you're doing in the other, and you just need to have an understanding of where the differences are between those two tests. Okay, so if you're indeed facing the task of taking both the SAT and the ACT, then you need to understand, as I mentioned, the differences and the similarities between these two tests. Now, the good news for you is that when we talk about the similarities and differences, we're getting much more similar than we are different. Okay, so there's not so much for you to have to keep track of here. And so that also means that you can prepare for both of these tests pretty easily. And I want to go over what these similarities and differences are so that you can see just how similar they actually are. Okay, so as I mentioned, looking broadly, these two tests are similar. In fact, what can be some of the toughest aspects for students are actually the same on both exams. First, let's start with time. That's the big one. Both the SAT and ACT have 3+ hours of testing time, and you have to get used to sitting down and taking a test this long, because 3 hours of testing time also doesn't include breaks. So you may potentially be there at an official testing site for somewhere on the upwards toward 4 hours. Multiple choice questions. Now, another similarity is that both the SAT and ACT are mostly multiple choice. We'll talk a bit more about that later, which test is not, but multiple choice questions can sometimes be annoying and frustrating to some students, but they also give you a very specific advantage. If you have 4 choices, you really might be able to get the correct answer because you can spot the wrong answers. And we call that process of elimination, and something that I'm going to touch on a bit later. And then lastly, both the SAT and ACT cover specific material, and they cover specific subjects as well. So that means you can know exactly what you're facing before you take these exams. Now, both tests do have a math section covering high school math through Algebra 2 and maybe a handful of trig questions. And they also have reading sections which require you to read advanced passages and answer complex questions about those passages. Now, they both have sections which require you to fix the grammar. SAT calls it writing and language. ACT calls it English, but it's essentially the same. And while they may seem very different because the ACT has its own dedicated science section, the truth is the SAT also has the same content, which is highly similar, but it is kind of infiltrated within the reading section of the test. So when you think about the differences, just keep in mind that they are very similar and have lots in common. What do they have in common? What is different, you said? So we're going to cover the main differences between these 2 tests. So to begin with, the SAT is mostly, I said mostly, but not entirely multiple choice. And that is because on the SAT math section, there are what we call grid-in questions where you have to actually supply the answer and write it in. Now, the ACT is exclusively multiple choice, which means that all you have to do is pick between 4 or 5 questions on each, 4 or 5 options on each question rather. Now, optional essay is the exception here, and the vast majority of questions on both tests are multiple choice otherwise. The essay was dropped from the SAT recently, January of last year, I do believe. So that is not even an option when you're taking the official SAT now. So another key difference is how the 2 tests are laid out. So the SAT has 4 sections: reading, writing, math with no calculator, and math with calculator. And then the ACT has English, math, reading, and science. Now, the SAT writing and language and the ACT English section are actually the same exact content or level of difficulty, but covering grammar and mechanics. And then the SAT has science questions throughout the test, as I mentioned, even if it doesn't have a dedicated section. Now, science essentially means here that you're going to be looking at tons of different charts and graphs and science-based reading comprehension content. Now, scoring, that's the obvious one here, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but as you can see, each has their own type of scoring. With the SAT, you are just taking the 2 main sections and adding the score together. With the ACT, you are adding them together and taking what we call a composite or an average score. But you should also know that even though the scales are very different between these 2 tests, a score basically equates to a percentile. So that gives us an idea of how well you performed in relation to other students who took the exam. So, if you scored a 1050 on the SAT or a 20 on the ACT, that means that you're right there in the 50th percentile, dead in the middle as far as how well you did in relationship to other students. And then also less than 1% of students on both the SAT and ACT actually get a perfect score. All right, a very small difference here with the time is that the overall time given for the test on both exam differs a little. The SAT is 3 even hours of testing time. That doesn't include breaks. And then the ACT is 2 hours and 55 minutes, which is very close. You're going to bump that up another 40 minutes if you do decide to take the essay, which is optional. But the most significant difference between the SAT and the ACT that you're going to see is the number of questions you're going to face. Now, as you can see from the comparison, ACT has a lot more questions and a little bit less time. So you're being asked to move at a much faster speed on that test than you would be on the SAT. So the time that you have for the ACT is seen by looking at the section by section, which I want to show you now. As I mentioned already, we're looking at English, math, reading, and science. We've been over the number of questions and how the time is, but we have not included the essay in that, as I mentioned earlier. All right, comparing that to the SAT, reading, writing, and language, and then the 2 math sections. The math no calculator section will be in effect until I think spring of 2024, and they're looking at transferring this test to an online format and dropping the no calculator policy. All right, any questions? Please pop them in the chat if you have them, and if not, we are going to just keep it moving. All right, test writers know just exactly how to trick you. I'm going to give you a very simple illustration of that. I'm going to put up a seemingly simple question that is often missed by tons of students. If x plus 7 equals 10, then what does x plus 3 equals? So at a first glance, I want you to think about when you first looked at that question without much thought, how many of you said, oh, 3? Of course you did. X equals 3. And ever since we were first introduced to the most basic concept of algebra, you have been solving for X. And so standardized test writers know how to trick you, and they're going to get students to miss this very simple math question. It's not because the tests are difficult or that they present difficult concepts, but it's just the way that they present them to you to see if you can handle it. Now, specifically, these tests are built to make you make mistakes. And that's why most of the common mistakes that cause students to answer questions incorrectly are actually really, really simple. You will likely not get questions wrong because you don't know the quadratic equation or you don't know a difficult vocabulary word, but really because you're going to do one of the few small things that's going to mess you up on the test, mess yourself up. And the first of those is answering the questions too quickly, just like in the previous math question. You're likely to speed through and miss important things, therefore answering incorrectly. And then number 2 is choosing answers carelessly. So like maybe you don't notice the difference between a semicolon and a colon on the grammar section, even though you might know what the grammar rules are. Doing work in your head. You will make mistakes by doing work in your head. There are all sorts of distractions during an official exam. It could be someone tapping on their pencil. It could be the ticking of the clock or someone even shuffling papers in the quiet room. Could be a siren going off outside, and all of these things can distract you if you try to do this work in your head. So it is highly advised and recommended that you always use scratch paper to show your work. Misreading the problem is another common mistake. You'll also see, for example, someone who reads increase instead of decrease, or they're looking for characterization of that an author would give rather than not, because they missed a word that was written in the question. And lastly, maybe it's just not understanding what to do. And I don't mean that you don't know the grammar rule or you forgot your math formula. What I mean is that you just have absolutely no idea what the question is asking you to do. Now, these are reasons that it is so difficult to get a perfect score. And this is why these tests have to be prepared for rather than just studied for. Getting ready for the SAT and ACT is much more like getting ready for a marathon than it is a music recital. And, we have tons of different classes in tutoring where, we focus heavily on repetition to make sure that you have prepped yourself to avoid these types of mistakes. But when you do prep, there's one thing that you need to keep in mind, and that is what is actually a good score. Now, I'm going to ask for some participation here because I love to hear from folks in the audience about what they think is a good score on the SAT or ACT. So pick the test that you are taking or that that your child may be, taking, and I want you to think about what that magic number is in your head. I want you to put it in the chat for me and tell me what you think a good score is. Does anybody have an idea of what a good score is? I'm going to give you just maybe another 15 seconds or so to type it in case you're typing. All right, let's see here. Okay, 3,000, 1,300 to 1,400 on the SAT and 990 on the SAT. Well, I am here to tell you folks that none of you is actually wrong. And the reason why is because a good score is the score that gets you into your dream college. Again, it's the score that you need personally to get into your dream school. And this is the only way that you can really think about the score that you need is by judging it against the median scores of the schools that you're looking to apply to. So many students may be pushing for that next level 10 points on the SAT or maybe just an extra point on the ACT, but that can actually lead to more stress and simple mistakes because, as I just said, you have to find the score that helps you in the admissions process at the schools you're applying to. So for one person, that might be a 990. For someone else, it may be a 13 or 1,400 or a 25 on the ACT. These are college admissions tests, and you need to use them that way. Identify the colleges that you want to go to, see what their median score is, and shoot for the stars. Now, while these tests are just one piece of the admissions puzzle, they actually have a lot bigger implications. So this chart, as you can see on the screen, goes through some schools that are commonly applied to, and it gives a sampling of where your scores can take you, in addition to, of course, your high school transcript, your extracurriculars, and your personal statement. But you can see now that by looking at the chart, these scores show the middle 50th percentile for incoming students at each school. So basically what that means is that 25% of incoming freshmen had test scores that were below the lowest number, and 25% had test scores that were above the highest number. And if you're inside those numbers, then what that means is that you're in the middle 50th percentile, and you have a score that will likely get you into that college. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get in, but your scores are going to be competitive. College admissions offices really look at many different elements of a student's application. We touched on that earlier, but your goal with the SAT and ACT is to just have a score that doesn't make test scores officers worry about your application. Now, if you're looking for median test scores for each college in America, you can go to our website, and I will give you guys that link so you can look it up, but you can search the school's name and begin building a dashboard of schools so that you can see the median school and how your personal score is comparing to the schools you're looking to get into. Now, we do this for one real reason, and we know that students are most successful when their target score means more than simply just achieving a number. So you'll be more successful at improving your scores if you know that they're going to help you get into those colleges and universities. Anyone have questions? Okay, we're going to keep moving forward. Now that we've talked about all the ways that the two tests are similar and how you can start to make sense of prepping for them, let's go into talking more about improving your scores. Now, we're going to go over some basic strategies here that you can use to improve your own personal scores. Now, this is not going to be everything that the Princeton Review can teach you. We have about 20 minutes left together, so we're going to cover as much of that as we possibly can. But good news is that even these basic strategies can really help you go take the test tomorrow if you wanted to. Even if it's just a simple practice test, that's a start. In fact, these sample problems that I'm about to go over with you actually came directly from the practice test that we have available and we do for free. We'll talk about an upcoming practice test that's happening at the library too. Okay, so before I get into individual questions and specific strategies, I want to cover one of the most important strategies of all on the SAT or ACT, and that is pacing. I bet that there is at least one of you out there who is terrible at pacing on tests. And the reason why is because you're human and that tests are extremely stressful. You likely may approach the test much like a rabbit. Okay. Let's assume that the rabbit is an average math student and that the rabbit sees 60 questions on the ACT math section or 58 questions on the SAT math section and wants to just charge ahead, speeding through the questions in order to do them all. That's likely going to cause a lot of issues. The rabbit's going to make silly mistakes and get plenty of those questions wrong. And in fact, if the rabbit is an average math student, then they're only going to get just 29 questions correct. So what that would look like is a 520 on the SAT math or just a 19 on the ACT math, and that puts them right around the 50th percentile. Now, instead of approaching this exam like the rabbit, you should more so act like the turtle. The turtle is also an average math student, but the turtle knows its strengths. So the turtle is only going to do the questions that it is comfortable with first, maybe only 45 of them in total. In fact, the turtle is going to make some mistakes, but that's how the test works. So the turtle only maybe gets 35 of those 45 questions correct. And then the turtle also guesses on the remaining questions, meaning that they probably got 3 or 4 more questions correct just on guesses. So what that looks like in comparison is a 600 or a 24. Now, neither the SAT nor the ACT have a guessing penalty, meaning that they count blank answers the same as incorrect answers here. So that means that you should always put down an answer, even if it is completely a guess. So just by understanding the proper pacing on the tests, the turtle can gain even 80 SAT math points or 5 ACT math points just by taking their time, even though they are both average math students. Now, I want to discuss, we just have a few problems here that we want to review. These are some specific strategies, and I want to start first with the reading strategy. Now, you're going to notice that there is actually no reading question attached to this because we are not going to have time to go over an entire reading passage. But this does, it really illustrates a fundamental strategy that we teach, and I want to share it with you. So you can always use process of elimination to just rule out any choices that are wrong. And there are certain ways that reading questions, they're phrased and that you should really look out for. So firstly, there's a lot more in breaking down the reading comprehension questions, but any answer choice that uses extreme language like never, always, or all is probably going to be a wrong answer. Next, you should also be wary of answer choices that use phrases that come directly from the passage. Remember, the SAT and ACT writers are trying to trick you, so they're going to put an exact phrase that was listed in the passage. They're going to pop it right there in one of your choices, and they're going to trick you into thinking that, oh, well, it was in the passage, so it has to be correct. Just because it's in the passage, though, does not mean that it actually answers the question. And then next, you must also rule out anything that could be true but isn't actually explicitly stated in the text. The SAT and ACT both clearly note that you do not need outside information to answer any reading question on their test. If it isn't in the passage, then it cannot be a correct answer. And then lastly, the most important thing you remember about the reading section is that the answer you want it might not be there, unfortunately. Multiple choice answers are not a customizable feature, so you must select from what you have. Now, you might not find an answer choice that you love, but it is still the best answer, or perhaps the least bad answer of all, and that is likely going to be your correct answer. All right, moving forward to the very last strategy, and that is a grammar strategy, coming from either the writing and language section of the SAT or the ACT English section. Now, you might sit down for these sections and think about every grammar rule that you have ever learned since elementary school. Don't do that. Okay, as soon as you see an underlined portion with a number in the passage, you're going to look at the answer choices. Okay, and here's the answer choices. So in this question, since the verbs are changing in the answer choices, you just check the subject to be sure that the subject and verb are consistent in number. And that's the only thing that you actually have to do for a question like this. Okay, products is the subject, so the verb must be plural. So if you eliminate A and B, which both contain singular verbs, then using the verb phrase in D would only make sense if the sentence was incomplete, right? So only C has a subject and verb that are consistent in number and make sense. So you know that the correct answer here just has to be C. Now, again, remember, these questions aren't asking you about proper grammar. They're trying to trick you. So do you notice that notice how the sentence puts the phrase of either type between the noun and verb? And they do that because they deliberately want to make your brain try to conjugate that. And if we read it too, quickly, we're going to see that the sentence it may sound right, but in truth, it may actually be totally wrong when you break it down. All right, I said last, but we have one more, sorry, one more question. And this is a math strategy. We have to talk about a math strategy when we approach the SAT and ACT, because quite frequently, the SAT and ACT are going to trip students up on math questions by making them do well, they have to do math. So take this word problem about a rug. First of all, it would be kind of weird if you were, trying to figure out the rug's area, but you didn't know the relationship between its length and width, or vice versa. It's not actually its length and width. This very phrase makes you have to think about things a bit differently. So here you're going to start with the formula that you already know of a rectangle. That one's pretty easy, length times width. And area equals length times width. So we know that the area of the rug is 80. So the formula is going to be 80 equals length times width. And then boom, we're going to enter a strategy in here. That is called PITA. PITA stands for plug in the answers. You have a formula and you have 5 possible answers in the ACT section that we're doing here. You're going to plug those answers into the formula. I want you to start with the middle one. You're going to go right to the middle. And the reason why is because you can determine that that's either the correct answer or it's too big or it's too small. And then you're automatically going to be able to mark out some of the other answer choices. So if you do your plugging in for the middle, you will see that 16 times 14 is 244, and you know that that number is much too large for this question. So instead of having to go from A through E, you can just automatically cross that one off and any number that is larger. So what you have essentially done, folks, is move yourself from a 5-choice question to a 2-choice question, and now you have a 50% chance of answering correctly. So then moving forward, you can do A or B, doesn't really matter. If you chose B, then you would see that that is the correct answer. All right, now there's one final strategy that I'm going to leave you all with, and that is the strategy that you need to know in order to get the score you need for the SAT, the ACT, or both tests. This is a strategy for you to prepare. I've shown you how these are not just tests that you can succeed on because you're successful in high school. You have to devote the time into getting ready for them. Now, and if that means that you need to prep, you need to know when you're going to take these tests. So here are the SAT and ACT test dates for the 2022 and 2023 school year. Now, each exam is offered throughout the year. Now, we're talking about this is the official exam dates. It's offered throughout the year, but on just 7 specific dates. So if you're wondering which date is best for you specifically, then we're going to encourage you to work backwards. So you know when you're going to be submitting your college applications, and that's going to be no later than January of your senior year. So you want to work backward from that, probably more like November when you'll be submitting them if you're doing, early action or early decision. And you need to have your SAT and ACT scores set up before you do all of the work applying, like writing your essays and perfecting your application. So this means that you should be done with taking these tests by the start of your senior year. Now, you should always give yourself a chance to take it again, just in case you have that day, where your alarm clock doesn't go off and your allergies act up, or your calculator runs out of batteries, or in my situation, you forget your ID at home when you go to take your ACT. But in short, you really need to plan to take the test as early as possible in your junior year if you are able to do so, and no later than spring of your junior year. There are lots of different ways you can prep, and I'm not here to sell you anything today, but I want you to understand that depending on the outcome that you're looking for when it comes to these tests will determine the type of preparation that you'll need to put into it. And so firstly, the first thing that you can do is take a practice test. Now, we have a practice test happening through the library, 7/23, I believe is the date, and I will make sure that everyone has the link to that in case you want to take a free SAT practice test. Get a good baseline of where you're starting so that you can develop that plan. Another thing that you can do is buy a book. You may already have a book at school. You could buy a book off of Amazon, and you can just do preparation on your own. You can do what we call self-prep online, and that's where you get all the materials and everything, and then you guide yourself through the process where you determine how long you're going to work through to achieve your end goal. Another thing that you can do is take a course. So if you're looking for a comprehensive overview, you're going to want to look for a course that covers everything, including the content and the strategies that you need for the test. And then the last thing that you can do is you can work with a tutor. So if you're the type of student who needs one-on-one help and you really want to, or you want to hone in on very specific strategies and not cover everything, you may be best off working with a tutor. Oh, thank you very much. The link to sign up for our practice test is in the chat if you have not registered and you want to take a practice test. All right, so just to wrap things up, guys, think about the scenario where you have admissions officers and they're reading applications from across the country. And when they see your application, you want to make sure that they are not worried about your SAT or ACT score. So they're going to have to carefully balance every other part of applications, from grades to extracurriculars to essays. But that one objective number they can use to compare all students across the country. And that's just that's a standardized test score, and it should be to your benefit on your application. Now, because we've talked about how you're going to prepare for the SAT, ACT, or maybe both, and improve your chances of getting into college, now you can go do it. So I want you to recall just our first big idea, and that's the truths and misconceptions about the two tests. Remember that the scores on the SAT and the ACT are one of the biggest factors in college admissions, third, if you remember. And that means that you need a good score on these tests, which are completely different than anything that you have seen before. And since schools do not care which test you take, you should prepare to take both if you're able to do so. Now, think again about the second thing we talked about, the similarities and the differences between the SAT and ACT. Remember that these two tests are much more similar than they are different, which means if you prep for one, then you are going to be well on your way for being prepared for the other one. And the key strategies for both tests are actually the same now, since both tests are written to trick students. So if you know that, you can approach the test with the right frame of mind. Now, prep for both tests, knowing that they are best used as tools to help you get into college, and a good score is the score that you need to get into your dream college. All right, with that, I would absolutely love to take any questions. We have about 5 more minutes left in our evening. And so if you have any burning questions about these tests, something that you've just been dying to find out or hear more about from our presentation, please use the chat option to submit your response. I would love to take the time to elaborate on anything that you have questions about. And while I'm waiting for questions, as a reminder, PrincetonReview.com is our website. It has tons and tons of free resources. I will include some very specific links for you in a follow-up email that you'll get either tomorrow or the next day, because I do want to make sure that we get the recording from the library, but I'll give you some of those really super useful links to look up information that you may have questions about, including median test scores for specific colleges. Now, if you want to speak to an educational advisor, you can always call our 800 number to review, or you can just email me directly if you have questions. I'm happy to chat with you, take any time necessary to make sure that you feel confident when it comes to your journey through college admissions. All right, perfect timing. I believe we have a question. All right, do schools prefer specific testing for different majors? That is actually a really good question, and I am happy to answer that. The short answer there is no, absolutely not. Schools don't care if you're taking the SAT or the ACT, or if you submit both scores, because it's just the piece of the missing piece of the application process that they're looking for. So, SAT subject tests used to be a way that students would kind of showcase their talent with math or history, literature, whatever it may be, but those have since gone away, and they're not really looking at those types of things anymore. So again, the short answer there is no school has a preference over the SAT or ACT, because they're just two companies who offer almost the exact same products, so it doesn't matter to them which you submit. Anything else that we have questions about? Oh, okay. So Johnny asks, I missed the grammar and math strategies. Could you go over them again? Well, so we're at the very end of our presentation, but we do have the recording. So I will email you that recording. And then I'm also going to send you a copy of my slide deck. So I'll send that to you if you'd like to take a quick look at any of the questions as well. And then if that doesn't suffice, Johnny, I'm happy to chat with you offline one-on-one if you want to go over those things in more detail. You are very welcome. All right, we have just a couple minutes left for questions if you have one that you would like to address with the group. All right, so I don't see anything coming through. If you are typing, that's completely fine. Please feel free to continue submitting your question, but I think we're just gonna go ahead and wrap things up and just let the majority of the group go ahead and dismiss. But I want to say thank you all again so very much for joining us for our SAT, ACT, or both. And thank you so much to Alexandria Libraries for hosting us this evening. Again, one more time, because it's so important, please register for the practice test if you've not taken a practice test, and reach out to me if you're looking for resources or have any more questions. Thank you all so much. You've been great.
Thank you so much, Nacy. I'm going to go ahead and plug our summer programs as well. I'll link to our teen page in the chat. And if you're not already signed up for summer reading, please do so. Everyone from babies to adults can sign up and win prizes. And so everybody in any age group can win tickets to see the Washington Nationals this summer. And teens can also get a free book and an entry for a gift card drawing. So check it out. Our full list of programs there, and don't miss out on the tickets.
Love it all. Tons of free things for you folks. So, all right, we're going to say goodbye for now. And if you need to reach out or would like to chat, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.